Going to call the meeting to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Jackson.
Here.
Hoffman. Miller.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Coon.
Here.
McGilvray.
Here. We all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We need approval of the minutes from June 4th. Moved by Jackson, supported by Miller. Any discussions or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed. Motion carries. Next is the approval of the agenda. We have a motion. Motion by Nelson, supported by Jackson. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed. Motion carries. We're now open for public comment. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to address this committee? Hearing none, we'll move on to communications. We have 4 items. Is there a motion? Motion by Jackson, supported by Nelson, to approve all the communications. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Like sign for those opposed. Motion carries. First item on the agenda is the Circuit Court Family Division, Oakland County Child Care Fund Budget 1920. And with us we have Mr. Cooper Ryder.
Yep.
Tina Ladry, Chief of Casework Services.
Good morning, Tom Shire. I'm the Child Welfare Director for MDHHS in Oakland County.
Very good. We need a motion.
Jackson.
Motion by Miller, supported by Jackson. Go ahead.
Thank you for having us. The Child Care Fund is a funding arrangement between the state and the county, and it's where we share the costs of care for delinquent and neglected and abused youth that are under the court's jurisdiction. The types of costs that we share included in this budget are independent living costs, foster care costs, private institutional costs, and facility costs. The facility costs are basically our children's village operations, and also in-home care costs. The court has currently 6 in-home care programs, and they're designed to keep the youth in their homes and in the community rather than to avoid the more expensive out-of-home care placements. What's new this year with the Child Care Fund budget is the new state pays first legislation. Up until now, the county has always paid 100% of the costs up front, and then the state would reimburse 50%. With the new state pays first legislation for neglect and abuse cases only, the state will be paying 100% of the costs, and the county will reimburse 50%. So it's a little different. It's quite a bit of a change. We're still kind of figuring it out. Since it's brand new, we have some informational meetings with the state upcoming, and as well as some training, and then hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about the impact and what that's going to mean to us in the future. And with that, we have the resolution in front of you, and we're here to answer any additional questions that you might have. We're hoping that you would approve this resolution so we can submit the Child Care Fund budget for 2020 to the state for approval. Thank you.
Is there any discussion? Questions? Tom?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Sir, I'm relatively new here on the commission, so I have a number of questions. I also don't view that as negative. It's just informational from my perspective.
Sure.
You just mentioned that the state is doing this 100% upfront stuff only for neglect and abuse cases. What percentage of this budget is that?
Oh, that's probably about maybe 15%, 20%.
15%?
Yeah, I'd say about 10 to 15%.
Okay. All right. And,
If you look at this one page, I don't know if you have this, it's the,
probably do we have hundreds of
it's,
pages?
it's the DHS 2091 summary page.
Okay,
If you look at that, the part that's neglect and abuse on that, it's the 2.4 million.
okay, that's the
com-
2.4. I was
yeah.
wondering why that was separated out
Yeah,
on this
that's,
document,
that's how the state asked us to do it this year, and because of the new procedure.
funding procedures. Okay, well, that's good. All right, so as part of this resolution, there's a budget amendment. Can you tell me why we have a budget amendment?
Yes, because it's because of the state pays first. Previously, if you want to look at the amendment, that 2.4 million was made up of 4 line items, okay? That covered independent living, foster care, and private institutions for the neglect and abuse population. That used to be about 5.2 million. So this is only half. So that means that the reimbursement amount that we would have been received back we're not going to receive reimbursement because we're not putting up the 100% cost up front. So we won't be getting that 50% reimbursement. So what they're doing on the amendment is they're reducing the subsidy, which would have collected that additional 50%, and then offsetting it with the reductions in those line items.
Okay.
Hopefully that explained
Yeah,
that okay.
does. Thank you. In talking about, on our document, it's like page 138. I don't know where it is on yours, but it's talking about the in-home care certification, and it indicates that the in-home care program expenditures are restricted to new or expanded programs. Can you explain why that is restricted to new or
Well, it's,
expanded programs?
yeah.
Do you know what I'm
They're
referring
not
to?
new or expanding, because these are all continuing programs of in-home care, with the exception of a new one that's the intensive reentry one.
Okay, it just says in there that in-home care program expenditures are restricted to new or expanded programs that are alternatives to out-of-home institutional
Well,
foster.
these are all alternatives to out-of-home placement, that's true.
Okay, but it's not restricted to new or expanded programs?
No, we've had these funded for many, many years, so.
Right, it seemed like that was odd language, but it was in the state form there. On page 140, you have a bunch of different categories, page 140 of our document. And it is, I'll tell you what the title of this document is. It's called Out-of-Home Care Program Report. It's a number of pages, but I don't know if it's possible for you to pull that up, but
I know that much of the document that you have in there, they're all in-home care programs in there. There's 6 of them.
okay.
So the documentation included in there is just all kind of requested documentation format for what the state requires us to put in,
All right.
upload into their computer system, so.
Well, let me just tell you what's on this page. It starts on the left column saying IC-PRBINST. And I think that must be private institution.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure exactly. And
Okay.
then next column it says daily, and then it has a per day, and then by
Yeah.
program, in care, cost, all those kind of
Yes.
issues.
Yeah, that is a new form that they just required us to start submitting this year.
Well, can you explain it to me, because I don't understand it.
Well, it outlines for children or juveniles that we have within the juvenile court system, children that need to be placed outside of their home for specialized treatment. There's probably 6 listed. Those are different types of private placements that we have asked the court to adopt a recommendation to place these children, boys or girls, depending on their age, depending on their criminal charges, or perhaps their mental health capabilities, or perhaps their drug addiction, different types of programming that locally we may not be able to service that child, or we may have already tried locally to service that child and they need something more specialized.
And this is the Vista Marie Lodes
Yes.
Hall and the Wolverine?
Yes, there's several Wolverine placements, and then Vista Maria Lourdes Hall currently has one or two girls. Yes.
Okay.
And that's a mental health behavioral facility in Vista Maria.
And you mentioned one or two. What is, at Vista Maria, what are the numbers typically for Wolverine?
I believe currently we have approximately 18 or 19, and I don't have
Oh, yeah.
your pages in front of me, but I believe we have approximately 18 boys and or girls separated into 5 or 6 different Wolverine placements. Those placements differ by type of charges and or type of treatment. That could be substance abuse need, mental health need, behavioral needs if they're particularly acting out, type if they need a secure facility.
And these are special treatment places that the county can't provide in-house, so you pay whatever these amounts are per day to have
Correct.
the individuals
Yes,
placed there.
we typically utilize the Children's Village and we work together quite well, and sometimes there's just circumstances that require a child to be serviced outside of local.
And do you get any, is there any feedback on outcomes of, or success rates at these outside facilities?
I don't have any particular numbers. If you're speaking of recidivism, we don't generally have a lot of numbers that we accumulate for recidivism. It's a tough population to deal with because often children are placed back in an environment that may or may not have been impacted by all the attempts that we've made. So kids can come back into the system. We try the least restrictive options first and work our way through whatever we have available. We'll keep working until the day before their 19th birthday.
Okay, and one of the things, you know, we've had this change in the, have they changed the state law now that we include 18-year-olds?
Not yet.
But that's coming. Is there, do you keep statistics on age, the number of people on different ages and
I
such?
do.
Because I see some of the, for example, in your Children Village shelter, it talks about detention ages 10 to 17 and shelter birth to
Yes.
17 and residential treatment 12 to 17. But do you keep some sort of statistics on the different age groups that you have there?
I do. We have in casework, we have an internal database, and I can break down monthly, and I have the June statistics if there's any particular building or program that you're looking for, what the ages are that we service, either in detention or in residential programming. And we do currently have children from 10 to 17,
Okay, and I mean,
sometimes maybe even 18-year-olds, because they can continue through their 18th year.
and I see where the shelter in transition, you can have children from birth. I mean, it would seem that's a different kind of
Yes, those are
care
the
that you
neglect
need.
and abuse kids.
Yeah,
Yes.
and do you get many like under 5, under 7?
I do not, that would be a different
That would be
area.
Mr.
I do only
Shire.
juvenile delinquent.
Okay. How about, do you get many under 5 or 7 years old?
I think I can answer that.
Thank you.
Typically, we attempt to limit the children going into Children's Village at the age of 10. So
Okay.
when it's pre-10, there's a lot more exceptions that are in place to prevent that and make sure that they're in a more, or at least restrictive setting, maybe a family-like setting, so.
Okay, so you try and keep them out of Children's Village if they're under 10, for sure.
Few and far between.
Okay, because it would seem like you need some special care if you had children in that age group. In this application, you mentioned like three different areas for Children's Village. One is the shelter, one is residential, one is detention. Is this just budgetary, or is there actually a substantive difference between those 3 areas?
I think it's both,
Mhm.
but you like to speak to that, Jody?
Yeah, there's a significant difference in those three areas.
Okay.
Shelter care has our DHHS foster care kids.
Okay,
They're for foster care services. Also in our Mandy's Place Shelter Care, we have status offender kids who are placed there by the court for a status offense. And then our residential treatment programs are kids that are placed by court order for treatment purposes. So they're there for anywhere, depending on the program and the youth, anywhere between 4 months and a year to receive treatment programming. And then we have secure detention where kids are placed by the court while they go through the court process.
okay, and what kind of time frame would that typically be, or is it,
For detention,
yeah,
it ranges, probably an estimate or average would be 30 days. But
Okay.
sometimes we have kids there for a year or more if they're going, depending on what is happening in the court. It can get very complicated, there can be a lot of delays. But for the most part, it's shorter term. We may have kids in detention waiting for a bed to open in a residential treatment program, so that could extend their time a little bit.
okay, and the shelter, what is the typical time frame for children in that shelter?
The foster care kids, the
Yes.
goal set by DHHS is generally 30 days.
Okay.
But the bulk of DHHS kids that need a placement are placed with families or relatives or other alternatives that DHHS has. So the kids that end up being placed at Children's Village are generally more high risk, more troubled, older kids, so their stay with us oftentimes gets extended well beyond the 30 days.
Okay, and do you keep statistics on length of stay?
Yes.
Okay, and so you could tell us if you were requested to provide information on what your typical length of stay or what your actual length of stay for various
For
categories?
all three modalities in Children's Village, we have information on length of stay.
Okay, and I know, as you indicate in your report, that for the so you basically you have the kids there pretty short time frame. Is that a fair statement?
In shelter care,
Shelter, residential, or detention?
residential, short of kids who run into complications with the criminal justice system, the court system, our treatment programs, I don't know how you would define short stay, but they can be with us for up to a year. We have a secure boys treatment program.
Okay.
And those are for kids who have tried in several different placements and failed, so it's a locked setting that they receive treatment programming in. And they can be with us for up to a year.
Okay, so a year would be the maximum
Yes.
length of time. But you have certification from North Central, correct?
For school, correct.
For the school aspects of it. And is there any other outside review, peer review, or any outside certification review of the programs?
We're licensed by the state of Michigan, so we receive an audit under all three different licenses annually.
And what does the audit involve?
An inspection, we have a licensing consultant that'll come out. He was just there yesterday, and he'll come out at specific times for each different license. So he'll come out and do a licensing review for residential treatment, for secure detention, and for our shelter care program.
And I was asking earlier, is there any measure, quantitative or qualitative measure of outcome from your services or success rate of your services?
We have an assessment center at Children's Village where we also operate our reentry process out of, and that has been, we've been doing that for years, but we've had different vendors working with us. For the last 3 years, it's been exclusively under Children's Village roof, where we've been able to keep some data. So for the last 3 years, we have taken a look at the kids who have finished a residential treatment program. They've also completed the reentry process. The kids, I think it was 246 kids we were able to look at, and the number of kids who did not recidivate, and our definition of recidivism is was not charged again in the adult system or the juvenile system for a crime over the course of a year, and that number was 15%.
Okay, so only 15% were?
Correct.
Okay, so you had a success rate arguably of 85%?
Correct, 15% recidivated.
Okay.
Now, you do have to allow in there for, kids that we weren't able to track. There are some kids moved out of the area, or of the 246, 15% recidivated.
Okay, and I take it that there are outside groups that work with you, such as parent groups and that sort of thing. Is that a fair statement? Are there parent groups that are involved with the Children's Village and the,
Parents of the children?
yes?
Yes, we have a parenting group that parents are very involved with. We have visitation, we have special activities at the village that involve their parents. Part of our treatment programming focuses on family engagement, so we require parents to be involved in the treatment program.
And independent of the statistics on recidivism, do you have any other surveys of the effectiveness of these programs?
We do use parent and youth surveys, how they feel about the program. We ask the parents at the beginning, and then halfway through the program, and then once they're released, we have our case coordinators do surveys.
Okay, and how, are they useful for you, in your opinion?
They are useful. I think the greatest value we have is just maybe the content of what individuals have to say on there, rather than any percentage of how satisfied or unsatisfied they are. But we get some good information, good feedback about how they feel about the program or their child's experience in the program.
I didn't have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? Kristen?
Yes, hi. I am looking at, it's the component detail report, in regards to the intensive probation and home care. At the bottom, under other costs, the testing materials, yearly 10,000. Can you provide examples of what testing materials would be utilized for the intensive probation?
John's looking, I'm not sure if we're speaking of the testing materials that we utilize for drug testing or,
Intensive probation. And that's under the service component, full name, full title, at the top of that.
hang on one second. Component detail.
Should be right here.
Yeah.
Must be talking about.
Are you looking at the GM's drug testing and that, are you on the second page of that component, or? We utilize psychological testing, and we also do some assessments, risk and needs assessments.
And that's for the intensive probation.
Within intensive probation, yes. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to follow where you're looking. Typically for the population that is in intensive probation, coming into the court system while the worker is developing the recommendation, there are risk and needs assessments done. We currently utilize an ACDI, but we are switching to what's a newer model promoted by SCAO, which will be the YLS CMI, the youth level of management, youth level of service case management inventory, that will give us a better read on what the family and the child needs. Or a psychological evaluation that would also be part of testing. Within the model of intensive probation, the testing that would be done typically would refer to like drug testing.
So that information I see broken down in different, no. So when you mentioned like the drug testing and the assessments, that's listed under other sections. So I was specifically referencing the intensive probation, because there's, on the component detail report, you have STRIDE, Oakland Schools wraparound program, and then intensive probation is listed separately. So each one of those service components are listed separately with the total amounts and the yearly costs. So everything that you just spoke upon are in other areas, but not specifically
Oh,
the intensive
okay.
probation. And the only reason why I asked specifically with the intensive probation, because that's the largest amount of money
Right,
yearly.
okay. Mr. Cooperrider believes he knows what you're looking at.
On page one fifty-nine.
This CCF info sheet that lists each of the programs with the amount of money next to them.
Yeah, so they start off with like
Yeah.
personnel, program supports, contractual services,
I think she's
non-scheduled
Gotta
payments.
be talking.
Okay.
Okay, so we haven't answered your question yet. What's the question again?
So what specifically to the intensive probation is the $10,000 yearly cost go towards?
Oh.
You guys have it?
Thank you.
Yeah, testing materials.
Gotcha.
So that would be,
I think that's the wireless.
Yeah.
I believe that, that refers to the youth
thank you.
level of service, case management inventory, which is a risk needs assessment coming into the recommendation for intensive probation. It would have helped us identify the level of need of supervision that the family and the child would need, which gives us kind of the idea of going towards intensive probation versus out of home, or versus maybe a lesser restrictive probation.
I see, thank you.
And those are utilized throughout all of the different components.
Okay, so is there a specific reason why it's listed under other costs and not supplies and materials?
Well, it's new for this coming fiscal year. We're utilizing that in the new budget. We're going to swap over from an inventory that we've used for 18 years. That in my feeling, excuse me, just wasn't effective, and we're going with a new, more effective model that the treatment courts are using, and that Scale recommended to us.
And empirically supported, I'm sure, right?
Yes,
Thank you.
oh, sure, no, you're welcome.
sorry.
Now that we got that figured out.
Yeah, sorry.
Any further questions?
I just have one
William.
comment. I just appreciate the work you do.
Oh, thank you.
My family 15 years ago adopted a child from one of the villages outside of this county. Didn't work out. I think you got classified as the multiple problem issues. I'm not sure exactly what's classified, but great kid. It's just the things that he came from just wasn't resolved. So we tried and tried. But I do appreciate and understand the work that you have to go through. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Jackson,
Yes.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes. Motion passes. Move on to number 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sheriff's Office Contract Amendment Number 1 for law enforcement services in the Charter Township of Orion, 2019 to 2021.
Second.
Moved and supported.
Morning, myself, Gaya, our fiscal officer. Orion Township Board of Trustees has passed a resolution, and now we're submitting to you to add a sergeant to the Orion Township contingent. There'll be the 4th sergeant out there. It'll give them coverage on a split shift, which is 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. for better coverage on both afternoons and midnights, which is the busiest time.
Thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none, we gotta have a roll call. Roll call vote, please.
Hoffman,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson,
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carries. Next item is Sheriff's Office, Laboratory Reorganization. Motion? Motion by Nelson, supported by Miller.
Had Captain Joe Quisenberry come up also. He is the captain over the Investigative and Forensic Services Division, which also includes, of his many duties, includes the forensic lab. This is something that we've been working on for several years now, a complete reorganization of the lab. As you know, we are one of only 2 labs accredited in the state of Michigan, the other being the Michigan State Police, and we're very proud of that. With the advancements that have taken place and the fact that this has become more of a science than police work, we've looked at And Kent Gardner's here also, who is the director of our lab. Kent's retired from the state police, been with us how many years now, Ken? Can't remember. A lot. Has done a great job there getting us accredited and doing everything we need to do. This reorganization, like I said, we've been working with the County Executive and Human Resources Division, Human Resources on this for quite some time. Specific questions can be answered by both Gaya and Joe, but we're pleased to present this to you and hope for your approval. One of the reasons that we're doing this is there's competition out there for these employees. These employees were, quite frankly, way underpaid compared to their counterparts within the Michigan State Police and actually in private industry. And several of them were being recruited to leave us, and that's the last thing we need, is to lose people that are critical to us in that forensic lab system. As you know, we support the entire county, all the police agencies within Oakland County. The vast majority come to us for forensic services, and we're pleased to provide that service to the police chiefs.
Any questions? I have one. How many people do we have in the lab now that works here?
Total, Joe?
24.
We started out with how many?
Yeah.
When I hired in 1977, there might have been 8 people down there, and it was in the jail at the time.
Any further questions? Mr. Coon?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. So, as I understand it, you're not adding any personnel here, you're just changing the categories and increasing the pay for various individuals. Is that a
That's
fair
correct, sir,
statement?
yes.
And I know when we had you guys in here a while back, we were talking about how how far behind you are in a lot of this stuff. Is there any other source of, I'm glad that you're working to retain more people, but to be able to fund more people so you can do a lot of this
Good
work
news on
quicker?
that front.
Okay.
We're hiring, we got a grant last year. We extended the job offer yet to that person?
If it hasn't been, it's gonna be.
We're very close to extending a job offer to a position that's grant funded, and then we also got another grant that will allow us to add 2 more people to the DNA lab that we'll be bringing to the board for those additional positions, which will help us with our, it's specifically a federal grant for DNA backlogs.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you.
Very good. Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Miller,
Yes.
Nelson,
Yes.
Coon,
Yes.
Jackson.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carries. Next item, number 4, is Sheriff's Office, High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas Grant Acceptance. Do we have a motion? Motion by Hoffman, supported by Miller.
This is a grant through HIDA, which is one of, is there 30 nationwide, Joe? Roughly a little over 30. Michigan is one of the designated areas. I currently am the chair of the Michigan HIDA. I look back, I've been on the board there since April of 2015, which has been I managed not to be the chair for all those years, but they finally caught up to me. Joe is our person that sits, there's a budget committee that sits and goes over how the money's gonna be doled out. I'm pleased to announce, normally I tell you that, Oakland County gets the short end of the stick on these grants. We happen to get the most money of any initiative across the state of Michigan, which we're pretty proud of. It's because of the great work that Joe, the narcotics enforcement team falls underneath Captain Quisenberry. So we're pleased to announce that this is one time where Oakland County does pretty well comparatively. And this will pay for overtime. You see the local departments that participate within the resolution, including the sheriff's office, so it'll pay for overtime and for cell phones.
Any discussions or corrections? Or discussions or questions? I'm sorry. Mr. Coon?
Yeah, Chairman, thank you. Couple of questions. I mean, I appreciate the detailed report here, but it talks in here that the NET task force is responding to evolving drug trends with a specialized street crew. What is that about?
I'll let Joe answer that.
Okay.
Was the question a specialized street crew, is that what you said?
Yes, sir,
Um,
for heroin enforcement.
Well, obviously, what's gone on in the last 5 years in terms of addiction levels on opioids and requires us to modify our resources to address a specific need. And this specific need would be the opioid crisis, which on the street, almost all opioids are being sold as heroin, so we're calling it heroin, when in fact it's an opioid, a synthetic opioid. So with that said, we're addressing our resources to that specialty need at this time, which is, go back 7, 8 years when it was, we had to have specialty units for marijuana grow ops because of the change in statute. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. So at this point, you take the existing resources and put them where where the public gets the best benefit from it.
Okay, and I know it also indicates in there that the heroin mixed with fentanyl and the cocaine use is increasing at an alarming rate. Is there, how do you quantify that or do you have some sort of quantitative?
It's all
measure?
tracked through the DEA, and so the DEA puts out its yearly report, and HIDA puts out its yearly report, in which we take all statistics and cases and put it into a database that it spits back out to us where the trends are and the volumes that it's coming in. So the report might be 10 months behind what we're seeing on the street.
Okay. And in this report, it also indicates that you're going to be monitoring doctors and pain clinics selling directly to users. How important is that, and how would you go about that?
There was a change in statute, I think in 2017, called MAPS, where it became compulsory for all doctors and pharmacies to report all filling of prescriptions. And so, and then that database is now accessible to everyone, so they have to enter their data quickly. Well, the DEA has what's called a diversion crew that monitors all data going into the MAP system, and street crews to investigate potential abuses. And NET, the Sheriff's Office, has resources committed to the DEA to assist in that.
Oh, that's interesting. And so when you say that data is available to everyone, you mean everyone in law enforcement, or is it available to anyone?
Well, the database is called MAPS, is right now, hospitals, doctors, and pharmacies are compelled or required to put in all prescription drug prescriptions. And law enforcement has access to that database.
Okay.
So that gives us a good, chance to see where are prescription drugs being prescribed more and more. I go back to where, I think it was 2013 or 14, Florida was the most abused state in the world with opioid prescriptions. And they passed a compulsory reporting system for prescriptions, then they became the least, because they were first on board with it. And almost all states have followed in the same principle of compelling drug companies and doctors and hospitals and pharmacies to put this data into a base.
Okay, well, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
Any further questions?
Just have a comment.
Mr. Miller?
I just appreciate the contract that you guys put together, especially number 14 in the contract was the termination of agreement. I like the language in there. And then the number 16, the post-closeout adjustment, just that protection.
You can thank Corporation Counsel for that.
And then 23, the execution by both parties. That's definitely, I appreciate that. And the Exhibit E, which is the example of a paycheck, just for everybody to see. I like that. I appreciate that as well.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Nelson, Yes. Coon, Jackson.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carries. Next item we have is Sheriff's Office 2019 Marine Safety Program Grant Acceptance. We need a motion. Motion by Miller, supported by Jackson.
Well, I just told you how well we're doing on the HIDA grant. This is a different animal. This is our grant we get from the state of Michigan, from the DNR, and as you know, for many, many years, we've come before this committee and other committees that basically there is no formula. The DNR decides who gets what, and for years we've complained about it. Many former commissioners who were in the state legislature have introduced legislation, try to modify that. We haven't been successful, but this is the pittance we get from Oakland County for the motor building. We're asking you to accept it.
Any discussion? Mr. Kuhn?
Okay, so you requested 671,000, you only received 136,000.
Correct.
And that 671,000 is stuff that you believe.
We're still spending it.
Yeah, you're spending it, and it should be subsidized by the state. You believe they should be paying that.
Yeah, the boat registrations are what pays for this, and, you know, there's been talk over the years of raising the fees. I mean, I've got a couple wave runners, and I think, you know, to register for 3 years is like $16. You know, my boat is like $28, and it hasn't gone up in years and years, and nobody likes having fees raised, I get that. But, you know, in order to properly support, there's been no inflationary increases in this, and again, because DNR is arbitrary in how they award these, you'll get a county up in northern Michigan, and I'm not knocking the counties in northern Michigan that get more money than we do because, you know, they're on the Great Lakes, they're on Lake Huron, they're at Lake Michigan.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Coon.
Yes.
Jackson.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
McGilvray.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Motion carries. Next, we have Sheriff's Office 2019 Law Enforcement Distribution Program Acceptance. Do we have a motion? Motion by Hoffman, supported by Miller.
This is our biannual allotment from the state of Michigan for in-service training, or actually any training for any MCOs, licensed police officer within the sheriff's office. Again, it's not a whole lot of money. We get about, I don't know, maybe somewhere between $130 and $140 a year. It varies based on the revenue coming in, which isn't a whole lot of money. Generally, a registration fee to a class is $100. So we do the best we can. The county does support us with other general fund money for training for our deputies, both in corrections and the road. And we're asking you to accept this grant.
Any questions or discussion? Hearing none, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Jackson.
Yes.
Hoffman.
Yes.
Miller.
Yes.
Nelson.
Yes.
Coon. McGilvray.
Yes.
Motion carried.
Thank you very much.
Motion carries.
Thank you.
Is there any other business? Being none, meeting's adjourned.